This is your host, Robert Klein, from The Art of Fighting, and we're back with Antonio Graceffo, the author of The Monk from Brooklyn, the host and creator of Martial Arts Odyssey, and a noted expert on Southeast Asian martial arts. He's also a frequent co-host on the show.
To David Collins, and we were training. He goes, "What can I do for you?" I said, "I love Kung Fu and I love what you do, but I really want to box." And I secretly wanted to box, and I just never admitted it. And he took me to a professional boxing trainer, and that's my first ever professional boxing trainer. And he took me there, and he went the first few weeks. He went every single day with me to watch me box, and then we'd get in the car and we'd talk, and maybe we'd go have a Coke or something. We'd talk about my training, and then when he saw I was okay with the boxing gym, then he kind of left me there. So that's how I started boxing, and I was with that trainer, and that trainer basically said, I had general toughness. I was very strong at that time. I was competing in bodybuilding. So I was like really big and cut, and I was strong and tough from fighting with David Collins and training with him. I really had literally no natural ability at all, which I've told you before. I had no sports ability. I had no boxing ability. I didn't understand what rhythm was. I didn't understand movement. My idea of a block was that if I dropped my hand, you would hit me. That was my strategy. And I'm going to make you hit me until my cardio outlasts yours, and then I'm going to win the fight. And I mean, it was crazy. And that's how and then when I started fighting like real boxers, up until then I was fighting these like karate guys that were doing kickboxing. But literally 80% of guys in the world at that time that called themselves kickboxers were actually black belts in either karate or taekwondo who figured out they could make some money doing kickboxing, and they were fighting kickboxing. At that time, boxing was not considered a martial art, and wrestling was not considered a martial art. And it was really interesting because Bruce Lee considered those two both martial arts, and David Collins did too. His teaching was a lot like Jeet Kune Do. And he always said that wrestling is a martial art, fencing is a martial art, boxing is a martial art. But at that time, there was really a division. Boxers were over here doing their own thing, and it was like this sport that was slowly dying and going downhill. And all the flash, young guys were doing martial arts, but none of them could really fight. And almost every time they ever had a matchup, let's put a boxer in the ring with a kickboxer, boxer would win like every time, right? So at that time, when I would go to these kickboxing competitions or fight or whatever, I was really fighting taekwondo or karate guys. Didn't have half the boxing training I'd had with David Collins. They hadn't had nearly the sparring. I mean, we had so much sparring. And we sparred. I mean, our partners were chosen by our rank, not by weight. So I mean, as a kid, I was expected to fight with adults, if they were of the same or lower rank. And so I just grew up with that, just being normal. And so I'm 21, so I go and I start learning boxing, and I get in there and I'm trying to fight with boxers the way I normally did before with kickboxers, except not kicking them. And of course, when I drop my, they're hitting me with multi-punch combinations, and they really know what they're doing. So I'm getting cut up quite a lot, but I loved it. And coach was really nice though. He's like, well, you got the toughness, you got the guts, you got cardio, you got the strength. He goes, we just got to work on your technique, and you're not afraid. And they were really putting a lot of pressure on me to turn pro, and I hadn't even had one amateur fight. One of the issues at age 21 really is that you're really too old already to fight amateur. I'm not sure what the rules are now. I don't want to pretend to be an expert on the rules, but at that time, let's say golden gloves and things like that, I think there was sort of an age cap. And 21 is kind of late to get into amateur boxing, and so the idea was, well, you'll just go pro. And one of the problems with the South, this is all in Tennessee, and one of the problems with the South is that distances are so far apart, between this gym and the next gym might be, a 3-hour drive, right? So when you go into a pool to fight, it's hard to find an even matchup. You pretty much, if they find you an opponent, as much of my life, much of my fighting life that I spent in the South was sitting by the phone waiting to see if they found me an opponent. And they often didn't. And there's two, this is pretty famous, I hold 2 titles, or did at some point, I don't know where they're recorded. I hold 2 like regional Golden Gloves championship winning titles, right? Both of which I won by default. because they couldn't find an opponent. I came in second in a regional qualifier where there was only one other guy, but because I came in second, I could have advanced to like, the whatever the next higher level was, and I guess fought the same guy again. I don't know, but and that's when you're in the South. When you're in a big city like Chicago or New York or something, I'm sure that if you weigh 186 pounds, there's 100 guys at 186 pounds, they'll kind of match you up with the right guy. But in the South, it doesn't happen. So there's been a lot of the guys I trained with, I knew a lot of guys that were contenders or almost contenders, and they were just so ridiculously overmatched and punched out before they ever, by the time they finally got their big break, they were just dead already, God. I remember this guy Kelvin, and he finally got his big break to go against Bone Crusher Smith. And, he, at that point, he'd had like 300 fights or some insane number. Another guy, Barry Audia, he was actually ranked like 10th in the world, but he had so many fights. And if you look at my hero Muhammad Ali or Mike Tyson and Muhammad Ali both had, I think, less than 20 pro fights before they fought for the championship. But it was because they had good management. They were in a big city. They matched them with the right people, moving them up the right way. And these guys basically had to take any fight that came down the pipe. So anyway, that's how I got into boxing. They were putting a lot of pressure on me to go pro. I'd actually agreed because I wanted to eventually anyway. And I still had an attitude of, hey, I've been hit so many times for free. How much worse could it be to get hit for money? And then I screwed up at college and basically got kicked out of college.
So what happened at college?
I got in trouble. Okay, I was a jerk. Let me just go ahead and let that out there. I was a jerk. I was very arrogant. I was bodybuilding. I was living it was the first time in my life I've been living in like a house with my mates, completely free to do whatever we want, and it just turned into Animal House. We were just like going crazy, and I was bodybuilding, so I was really arrogant because of that. And when that happened, I suddenly wound up in this weird situation with the Army that they were actually going to charge me. They were going to charge me back the money they'd already laid out for my education, and I was in some other trouble. My whole life just exploded, right? So I was really in trouble in the Army. I was getting kicked out of college. When my mom died, my dad made her a promise that all 5 of us kids would graduate college, and my grandmother made her that promise as well. And I'd known that my whole life. So being Catholic, you grow up with a lot of guilt, right? So one of the 2 pieces of guilt that I always carried with me my whole life was that, I'm probably going to cry, but we were taught, as immigrant children, we are taught how lucky we are to be born in the United States and what the people before us sacrificed to get us there. I mean, what my grandparents must have endured to get to America in the first place. And they died in the same shitty, crappy apartment that they lived in when they got there. They moved once. They moved from Mulberry Street, which is Little Italy, to Crotone Avenue, which is Little Italy in the Bronx. And then they died in that apartment, 60 years later or whatever. And that's all they got out of it. That is all they got out of leaving Sicily, was that they got to live in one shitty apartment and then live in another shitty apartment. And work in a factory and sew with a 60-watt light bulb and piecework and get paid for it. And that is the only benefit they personally got out of going to college, out of immigrating. They had 2 children. My aunt, because she was a girl, they you're going to get married and quit high school and work in a factory, and that's what she did. My dad wanted to be a civil servant. And he joined the Air Force in the first year of the Air Force inception. He became an electrician and then worked for the city of New York, transit. So that was a bit of a step up. My mom was a school teacher, so my mom and her mom was a school teacher. So they wanted us 5 kids to go to college, and we had it drilled in our heads our whole lives. Grandma and Grandpa suffered, so you could be born here and have a chance to go to college.
I'm your host, Robert Klein, and this is The Art of Fighting.